Thank you so much for the introduction, and thank you for inviting me here. Thank you, Gabrielle. Thank you, Stephanie. And thank you, Graham. And first of all, I have to start with my name, which is really Katarzyna. But in Polish, if you want to be nice to some Katarzyna, you can call her Kasia. And my surname is Kasia as well, and I'm purely my parents' joke. And it's like that. So it is Kasia, Kasia, but if you want to be serious about me, you can call me Katarzyna if you want. But nobody does. I don't know why. I would like to talk about attention and about boredom, because when I was thinking about the topic of this wonderful symposium, I thought that boredom is both an enemy of attention, but you can't focus your attention on anything without being at least slightly bored. So I will start talking about boredom. Then I will start from the modern boredom of lack. Then I will go to the technological fight against boredom and to the so-called postmodern boredom of excess. Then I will talk about the advantages of being bored and about the way from boredom to contemplation. Then I would like to present a protocol of attention, which can lead us out of boredom. Ingarden was a Polish philosopher. I will talk about him later. And at the end, when you will be already very bored, I will finish with the community, with the idea of the community based on the experience of the aesthetic value. I mean, I will talk about the community based on a very particular form of attention. But let me start with boredom. So boredom, according to the popular psychological definitions, is an aversive state of not being able to engage attention in any external or internal stimuli. It can also be described as a total loss of interest, dissolution of focus, alienation, or tiredness. We can say that boredom is the most important enemy of attention. If we look carefully at the resources devoted to combating boredom, we will notice that it is one of the most serious problems for humanity. It is a challenge for designers. It causes problems in everyday life for regular people, and it can even ruin the empires. Many volumes of criminological studies have been devoted to boredom, and tests using a so-called boredom proneness scale are also used by psychologists to diagnose criminal potential in a patient. And there is no value in limiting yourself to the selfish declaration that this problem does not concern me. Because, as rightly noted by Orvin Clapp, some people say, I quote, they have never been bored, but their good fortune hardly negates the fact that others obviously are, and some perhaps unconsciously, enough to constitute a social problem. In this case, analogy with poverty seems appropriate. Some are well-fed does not keep others from being hungry. End of quotation. Boredom lurks around every corner, at home, at work, at school, at the university. We are bored with politics, religion, and war. The boredom experienced by its soldiers in trenches has often been described as was best summarized by Stanisław Jerzelec, writing, I experienced a period of terrible boredom, which was only alleviated by terror. It has been proven that in many cases, boredom leads to the abuse of alcohol and drugs. It may lead to nihilism, despair, and decadence. Development of the entertainment industry, new media, and ever better ways of providing information can all be treated as integrated activities aimed at achieving the ultimate victory over the emotion, sometimes referred to as the southern demon. But are we really winning this fight? Or maybe we have overdone it. Perhaps our panic fear of boredom has led us to a situation in which it is taking a different guise. And on the other hand, have we not got rid of some very important element of existence by multiplying and intensifying stimuli? I will try to answer these questions using theoretical tools in the field of aesthetics. I will refer to the theory of sensory perception. My choice results from the fact that boredom is an emotional and such it begins, it's an emotion, and as such it begins in the body. So an attempt to contextualize it should be based on the category of experience. And for the record, I want to point out that I do not consider aesthetics as the philosophy of beauty and art. Although, of course, we can analyze the aesthetic experience associated with a work of art as a special, perhaps even borderline, example of aesthetic experience. My first example here will be, as I said, modern boredom of lack. I have two pictures. I never do PowerPoint presentations because I think that they distract our attention, but when I'm talking about boredom, I decided to use PowerPoint as well. So I'm not very good with the presentations. Before turning to the late postmodern, well-known boredom of excess, I would like to look at the modern, romantic, and later modernist boredom. Not only did the great industrial revolution bring an impulse for the development of capitalism, but one of its consequences is the emergence of a specific sense of tiredness, lack, repetition, and hopelessness on the affective map. It seems that factors such as the introduction of machine technology, changes the mode of production, emergence of free time as a separate category, and above all, social inequality in the capitalist economy contributed to the development of boredom. Modern boredom was diversified, above all in terms of class. The boredom of the leisure class, in the first picture, as Thorstein Veblen defines it, is different than the boredom of the working class. The former took the form of intentional uselessness. As noted by Veblen, for example, the clothing of the leisure class was intentionally uncomfortable and impractical, so that its representatives could not do anything useful, because it was one of the most important determinants of belonging to a privileged group. Time was not meant to be used, but was intentionally wasted, at best on irrelevant activities, in example, embroidering many dozens of dowry napkins. Life was to be passed in a noble and terribly boring, depressing idleness. The boredom of the proletariat took a completely different form. Its source was the constant repetition of actions that neither translated into any particular effect for the workers, nor gave them any satisfaction. Since the introduction of Ford's production line model, these activities did not require any special qualifications or conceptual involvement. In the vicious circle of alienation, boredom was intertwined with fatigue and the inability to generate and satisfy needs other than the most basic ones, animal, as the young Karl Marx refers to them. Okay. As I mentioned Marx, I heard the voice. Okay. Marx referred to them in the economic and philosophical manuscripts of 1844. The difference between these two kinds of boredom consisted not so much in the dissimilarity of the experience itself, which was similar in many respects, but rather in the attitude towards it. Ways of being bored were, as I noticed, dependent on class membership, but the source of the unpleasant emotions, in both cases, was the shortage of, respectively, sufficiently sophisticated entertainment or activities, or lack of money, time, and strength. Modern boredom was extensively studied by the philosophers. I would like to refer briefly to two of them, who elaborated most complex theories, Schopenhauer and Heidegger. Arthur Schopenhauer described this modern boredom as a disaster for the individual. He claimed that we are dealing with it in a situation where stimulus-deprived individuals are confronted with themselves, with their own impossible-to-satisfy will, and with the hopelessness of their own existence. I quote Schopenhauer, "Boredom is certainly not an evil to be taken lightly. It will ultimately etch lines of true despair onto a face. It makes beings with as little love for each other as humans nonetheless seek each other with such intensity, and in this way becomes the source of sociability." I find it particularly interesting that according to this concept, boredom is both cause and effect of alienation. Martin Heidegger looked at this problem from a similar perspective and devoted several dozen pages of the fundamental concepts of metaphysics to the issue of boredom, where he analyzed this experience. He describes it in the example of waiting for a train, when it is impossible to move to a different place, and at the same time, there is no access to entertainment or the possibility of undertaking any meaningful activity. What is still worse, there is no knowing how much time there is to use, or rather to kill. For Heidegger, boredom becomes a fundamental attunement of existence, and therefore of philosophizing. In the Fundamental Concepts of Metaphysics, he writes, I quote, "The attunement, profound boredom, if only we knew what it is, or we even pervaded by this attunement. Yet, even assuming that we are pervaded by this fundamental attunement, what in the world does boredom have to do with the question concerning world, finitude, and individuation? We can perceive that this fundamental attunement of boredom is tied up with time and the problem of time." End of quotation. Starting from the analysis of the most superficial form of boredom, Heidegger arrives at the conclusion that being bored is one of the most important characteristics of Dasein. Boredom is an emotion of being held in limbo by time as it drags. It is deeply connected to the temporality of being, or in other words, of being aware of our own temporal limitations. In boredom, time becomes oppressive, and in order to pass it, I quote, "something we are looking for is precisely something with which to occupy ourselves." In fact, as Heidegger writes, "For in passing the time, we simultaneously seek to occupy ourselves with something. Yet, how do we go about it? It is by forcing ourselves to go to work, despite there being a pleasant snowfall on the hills? No. In passing the time, we seek for something to occupy us. In the activity we have sought in passing the time, we are not interested in what occupies us, nor even whether anything comes of it, and we thereby help others. We are interested neither in the object nor in the result of the activity, but in being occupied as such, and in this alone. We are seeking to be occupied in any way. Why? Merely so as not to fall into this being left empty that is emerging in boredom." End of quotation. And with this definition, it would seem that we can breathe a sigh of relief. After all, thanks to the contemporary dynamic development of technology, it is apparently easy to occupy ourselves and to escape the feeling of emptiness. And now the slide I'm afraid of. Okay. In The Information Bomb, Paul Virilio wrote that in today's world, nothing happens, everything is happening. This means that we are dealing with a monotonous flow of events, or rather with images, constantly supplied to us by the media, which still generate content, operating on a global scale and never being depleted. This content is constantly replenished, expanded, and regenerated. We do not need a newspaper or television to interact with the ever-flowing stream of information. The internet provides us with it virtually non-stop, making us the best-informed generation in the history of mankind. The turbulent development of electronic media is one of the greatest civilizational changes that has taken place at the beginning of the 21st century. In the prophetic book, The Transparent Society, published in 1989, Gianni Vattimo formulates the thesis, frequently repeated later, that mass media played a decisive role in the birth of postmodern society. And although they did not make it any more transparent, they made it much more complex, even chaotic. Moreover, for Vattimo, this chaos is the source of enormous potential for emancipation, not least because the structureless mess is a space in which various unstructured, top-down, spontaneous ideas can be realized. In my opinion, in this context, it would be ideal to create a publicly accessible platform that would allow everyone to speak, express their views, and engage in action. Undoubtedly, from the perspective of hope for emancipation put in chaos, it is difficult to imagine a space better than the infinite virtual reality, where we can all function regardless of what limitations we have to endure in the so-called real world. The category of chaos and even crisis is perceived as a dawn of freedom that is to be born thanks to the opportunities offered to us by the most interactive of the media. But it is not all. The internet allows us also, it's going to be like that, to establish relationships with other agents, human or not human, form and develop friendships, enter into romantic relationships, and participate in collective and individual entertainment. The development of mobile technologies makes it easier to find on the internet. It is possible that, to put it simply, a smartphone, as something we can pay our attention to, is an effective and final panacea for boredom, anxiety, existential fear, and the sense of futility. I'm afraid that it is not quite so. And maybe even the contrary. After all, we can see that the dynamic development of new media has led to the emergence of many new problems, and a new type of boredom is one of them. This contemporary late postmodern boredom does not stem from the usual lack of stimulation of the attention circuit in our brain, from a simple shortage of stimuli. Its source is not only repetitiveness and alienation. It might seem that the contemporary boredom of excess is due to the widespread simplification of access to new media, less internally differentiated, but that does not seem to me entirely true. The so-called domestication of the internet, that is the dissemination of access to the global network with the use of high-speed connections available in private homes, is a breakthrough and the beginning of change. Depending on the perspective, it may be a source of joy or concern. There is no doubt that the first decade of our millennium was a breakthrough in the emergence of new ways to deal with boredom, resulting from lack of entertainment or a lack of contact with others. It would seem that the inexhaustible, constantly growing offer by and for network users will solve the problem of ennui, spleen, or ordinary mundane boredom once and for all. If we look more carefully, for example, at the real internet access map, faith in its democracy may be significantly weakened. In 2013, Google's executive chairman Eric Schmidt famously tweeted, "For every person online, there are 2 who are not. By the end of the decade, everyone on Earth will be connected." It seems, however, that this way a manifestation of wishful thinking, because it is difficult to imagine that by 2023, all barriers preventing over 4 billion people from using the internet could be abolished. For example, 97% of people in Ethiopia cannot use the internet, which does not seem to be very important considering the magnitude of shortages they suffer. But for the connected part of humanity, liberation from the boredom resulting from an excess of stimuli requires the search for experiences strong enough to allow subjects to escape from their daily routine. An interesting and very widespread strategy in this context is to look for new things, for example, by turning to the world of the new technologies. But this is a trap. As Evgeny Morozov wrote, we turn to technology to escape boredom, but information overload also leads to the profound boredom. The excess of chaotic, random, and irrelevant information of no significance is perceived as a tiring noise. As a result, we are dealing with the entropy of communication, and a subjective sense of being overwhelmed resulting from the fact that, I quote Orvin Clapp, physical conductors and systems easily outstrip humans. For example, the channel capacity of industrial workers is about 8 bits per second, whereas physical conductors and computers can easily surpass this. So the weakest link in the vast chain of communication is often the human brain, because for all its powers of abstractions, it is severely limited in channel capacity. In other words, the great technological revolution has not changed the capacity of our brain or its ability to associate facts. As neuroscientists have shown, changes take place much slower and concern primarily the cognitive structure. In example, the mechanisms of associating facts, joining threads, and memory traces arising in the neuroplastic structure of the human brain. This type of boredom can be seen as a part of the widespread aesthetization process. In the modern world, there is an overproduction of aesthetic stimuli, that is, those that affect our senses. Excess leads to indifference, and this, in turn, makes us not recognize those phenomena, things and images that are in our visual field, but are not crucial for us. According to the main proponents of this concept, Wolfgang Welsch and Odo Marquardt, the subject constantly bombarded with information is finally numbed to its content. The unavoidable consequence of aesthetization is anestheticization, which leads the subject to a well-known feeling of emptiness, hopelessness, dullness, and the inability to address anything meaningful. Contemporary boredom is closely related to the phenomenon of information noise, to the overload which we are not able to process. It might seem that the phenomenon of information dependency is located on the opposite side of the spectrum, but if we compare the subjective emotional effects of so-called FOMO, fear of missing out, and information overload, it turns out that they bear surprising similarities. Experiments carried out in the 21st century in many places around the world, in which users were disconnected from the network for a limited time and their reactions were monitored, showed that a sudden break from excess resulted in a feeling of boredom. Perhaps Zygmunt Bauman is right when he states that, I quote, lack of tensions is not a vision of postmodern happiness, it is a postmodern nightmare. And on the other hand, some participants of these studies noticed that paradoxically, boredom resulting from disconnection from the internet and information was a valuable and positive life experience. But maybe there are some advantages of being bored. From this description I gave you, and from the description of the failed attempts of fighting boredom, we can see that distraction cannot be successfully fought with a bigger distraction. It is not enough to find another monster to get rid of the one that bothers us. Technology has not resolved the problem. It has created an information overload, leading to anesthetization and new forms of existential disquietude, anxiety and spleen. Modern boredom of lack and deprivation coexists with a postmodern boredom of excess. But maybe we should try to analyze it from a different perspective. Maybe boredom is not a real problem. In a speech to the graduates of an American art college, Joseph Brodsky praised and recommended boredom. I quote, "When hit by boredom, go for it. Let yourself be crushed by it. Submerge. Hit bottom. In general, with things unpleasant, the rule is, the sooner you hit bottom, the faster you surface." The idea here, to paraphrase another great poet of the English language, is to exact full look at the worst. The reason boredom deserves such scrutiny is that it represents pure, undiluted time in all its repetitive, redundant, monotonous splendor. End of quotation. This experience, which it is necessary to underline, is not pleasant at all, can become a new possibility of focus. Maybe a total distraction and indifference, the experience of time as it passes but cannot be passed, could be seen as a condition of attention. According to Susan Sontag, boredom is both bad and good. I quote Sontag, boredom is a function of attention. We are learning new models of attention, say favoring the ear more than the eye. But so long as we work within the old attention frame, we find X boring. An example, listening for sense rather than sound, being too message-oriented. Possibly, after repetition of the same single phrase or level of language or image for a long while, in a given written text or piece of music or film, if we become bored, we should ask if we are operating in the right frame of attention. End of quotation. I find this concept of the right frame of attention absolutely crucial. But how do I get there? How can I move from one frame to another? How can I move myself from being bored to being focused? How can I go from the disturbing emptiness of limbo to the satisfying fulfillment of contemplation? In order to examine this idea, let's follow the advice of Siegfried Kracauer. And there is another slide. No. I quote Kracauer. On a sunny afternoon, when everyone is outside, one would do best to hang about in the train station or, better yet, stay at home, draw the curtains, and surrender oneself to the boredom of one's sofa. What if there were some advantages of boredom? Like, in example, creating new forms of attention or a deeper level of focus? Even if we find this experience unpleasant, it may still be profoundly meaningful. Kracauer perceives boredom as an existential break, when a person gives herself a permission to do nothing, to get bored. Instead of desperately seeking entertainment of any kind, one can contemplate one's sofa and actually pay attention to it. That can really be refreshing. In ancient Greece, free time and boredom were perceived as the necessary conditions of creativity. Therefore, sometimes hitting the bottom of boredom or facing time as it drags can become an impulse for changing the frame of attention and going from indifference to the intense activity of contemplation. Facing the temporality of being can stimulate the bored subject to act, but at the same time, I think it requires a lot of effort. I think that the attempts of creating new technological possibilities of entertainment have failed in so many ways because they have promised to do all the hard work, and all a user had to do was mere using. Attention requires involvement. And now I will go to my protagonist. And no, I don't know why it works like that. So instead of the idea of mindfulness, the growing popularity of which can be perceived as an evidence that we are heading in the right direction, I would like to propose the protocol of attention elaborated by Roman Ingarden. You can see Ingarden in his portrait wearing a turban, a portrait by Witkacy, Stanisław Ignacy Witkiewicz. Ingarden, born in 1893, died in 1970, was a Polish phenomenologist, ontologist, and aesthetician. He was a student of Edmund Husserl at the Göttingen University. I will base my argument on two texts of Ingarden, the literary work of art from 1931 and Aesthetic Object and Aesthetic Experience from 1937. I will focus on the idea of the aesthetic experience as a constitution of the aesthetic object in order to show that the possibility of changing the frame of attention is founded upon a subjective effort. First of all, aesthetic experience is not momentary. It does not come as a sudden illumination. Aesthetic experience is not just a quick feeling of pleasure or displeasure. This kind of experience is more like a process. It takes time and is divided into different phases. According to Ingarden, it starts with the so-called preliminary emotion, which leads to excitement, followed by the constitution of the aesthetic object, and then by contemplation. The structure of the aesthetic experience is based on the structure of the work of art, and I don't have time to present it here right now in more detail, but I would like to mention that according to Ingarden, the structure of a work of art is schematic and multi-layered. And I will start from preliminary emotion. That's my last slide. And then I will present different phases of the aesthetic experience. First, the anticipatory phase of the aesthetic experience is crucial in the context of boredom, because it is the exact moment when the change of attitude happens. It may occur only if we have emotional space. In example, this feeling of emptiness characteristic of boredom. Because what we should do is allow for the interruption of the normal course of our lives. This change of attitude can be compared with Sontag's idea of changing the frame of attention and can be the effect of our perception of an object, no matter if the object is real or imaginary, which attracts us with some peculiar quality or a set of qualities, and we can no longer be indifferent to it. This initial impulse evokes a special kind of affect called preliminary emotion, which initiates the process of the aesthetic experience. This emotion can halt or at least pause boredom because the perceived quality imposes itself on us. Of course, if the process of the aesthetic experience were interrupted at this point, boredom would come back immediately, and we would not be capable even of naming or evoking the quality which impressed us first. The preliminary emotion generated on the fundament of a primal interest has nothing to do with being pleased with something. It would rather be the first step towards attention through an intuitive contact. Ingarden writes, at first, to express ourselves metaphorically, it merely touches us, excites us, and stirs up in a peculiar way. This excitement transforms itself in falling in love with the quality which imposes itself on us. In the further phase of preliminary emotion, it changes into a composite emotional experience in which there may be distinguished the following moments. First, an emotional and yet still in germ, direct intercourse with the quality experience. Second, sort of desire to possess this quality and to argument the delight promised by the intuitive possession of it. And third, a tendency to satiate oneself with the quality in question, to consolidate the possession of it. End of quotation. We could say that the preliminary emotion is changing the frame of our attention by waking a desire. Its nature is dynamic because it is a first step taken in the direction of the process of the aesthetic experience and of the formation of its intentional correlative, that is the aesthetic object. Then comes the phase of excitement, which is a consequence of the preliminary emotion. The consequences of the preliminary emotion can go in various directions, but the most important one is the change of attitude. What occurs like is a transition from a natural practical attitude into a specifically aesthetic one. In example, we can go from boredom to excitement. The course of normal life is being suspended. Along with this suspension goes partial or complete removal of the actual experience of the world. The field of consciousness is being narrowed, and, as Ingarden puts it, the conviction of the existence of the real world, which constantly colors all our activity, withdraws somehow into shade, loses its importance and strength. And if the process of the aesthetic experience develops further, we can forget about the presence of the world at all. We forget about the temporal dimension as well, and we lose our sense of before and after. We are living with a moment, creating a conceptual space for the constitution of an aesthetic object. And what is important, this phase of excitement is filled with very intensive and creative activity of an individual. The next phase comes after this preliminary emotion and excitement, when we come back with closer scrutiny to the initial quality that attracted our attention. As a result of the suspension of time, space, and normal attitude, the quality advances to the front. It becomes the object of perception, separated from its primary surroundings. In consequence, as Ingarden observes, I quote, "It assumes a brightness, a grace, and a charm which it did not possess before. We satiate ourselves with this charm, and the quality which states us in a way becomes for us a value of a peculiar kind, a value which is not estimated in an unimpassioned act of judgment, but is directly felt." End of quotation. That is precisely the moment when we can experience pleasure, but at the same time, we face the dialectics of satiation and desire. We long for something more, for completion. Therefore, we start building an aesthetic object based on the actual or imaginary one. The constitution of an aesthetic object can follow two different patterns. The first one, when the preliminary emotion and the primary quality perceived aesthetically excite us freely, without the need of any further contact with the object we have found in the surrounding world. Or the second, when we need constant stimulation or inspiration from the actual work of art. The first one occurs in the case of an artist who constitutes an object to be physically made. The second case is closer to the perception by a viewer, reader, listener, and so forth. So I will talk about the second case, when we come back to the quality that attracted our attention, but we see it in a different way. I quote, "Oriented exclusively now to the qualities, eager to be satiated with the view of them, with their evident presence, we either notice a deficiency in the quality itself. This may be a quality of a developing melody, the continuation of which invites to be finished, or a peculiar facial expression, an example in a sculpture, which is not itself being noticed in details, or a vague silhouette of the facade of a Gothic cathedral, which calls to be filled up with further details, or new details of the given work of art impose themselves on us." End of quotation. We need to put an effort in order to find the right complementary qualities with the aid of corresponding representation. But at this point, two different scenarios are possible. In the first case, the representation of the complementary quality we have found can be so vivid that it is imposed upon the work of art, and the harmony of qualities formed by us takes the place of the harmony of qualities of the object. In effect, we do not notice anymore a difference between the real object and the aesthetic one, or, in other words, we replace the actual work of art with the one which we have constituted. In the second case, the representation of the corresponding quality is not vivid enough to lead to the imposition, and it does not correspond and does not agree with the details of work of art. In both cases, this apparent lack of harmony of qualities represented becomes for the perceiver a deficiency or a defect, which in consequence brings a negative emotional reaction to the work of art. Ingarden writes, "Our experience may end in this dissonance, or it may result in a rejecting of the ugly work of art and an exclusive immersion in the contemplation of the aesthetic object formed in representation, or, at last, the perception of the deficient, ugly work of art may prevail, and then the whole experience will terminate in a final constitution of a negatively valuable aesthetic object with an emotional response proper to it." End of quotation. In the situation when we base on the preliminary emotion of excitement, we try to grasp an initial quality, shaping the aesthetic object in such a way that it will be close to the work of art which changed our emotional attitude. But we do not wait passively for the work of art to impose on us new exciting qualities. We enter the dialogue with the work in search of those qualities which will enter into harmony with the initial quality. It means that the perception of the work of art requires an extreme attention in order to change step by step the preliminary emotion into an attitude oriented toward qualities in search of the harmony of those. And usually, this cannot be done at one stroke, because works of art need to be seen from various perspectives, from different points of view. The first impression has to be supplemented thanks to the work of attention. According to Ingarden, in the process of perception, there are two kinds of formation of the qualities grasped. First, when we construct categorical structures, and second, when we construct qualitative harmony structures. In the first case, we pose a corresponding subject of properties which would underline the quality of given shape, in example a human body, or we empathetically attribute some mental states or emotions to the work of art. In the second case, we grasp a multitude of qualities present in a work of art in order to harmonize them into a single whole. Therefore, a new quality can be constituted upon this new whole, but its presence does not veil the other, underlying primary qualities. Ingarden calls these Gestalt qualities. The construction of the harmony of qualities is the final aim of the whole aesthetic process. The harmony of qualities, and in particular, its quality, is, as Ingarden writes, if one is permitted to say so, the final principle of the creation and of the existence of an aesthetic object. The work of art leads, if not to a single precisely determined harmony of qualities, at least to a number of admissible qualitative harmonies which are suggested to the percipient. End of quotation. Ingarden also admits that sometimes the formation of the harmony of qualities can be very difficult, even painful. It happens when the work of art refuses our help and we have to supplement the harmony on our own because we anticipated it. And then the final phase, because so far the whole process of the aesthetic experience was characterized by a particular searching disquietude, starting from the emotional excitement through the constitution of an aesthetic object and the perception of qualities. The last and final phase is completely different. Instead of the dynamism and changeability, it brings a quietude of gazing upon, or in other words, of contemplation. In Ingarden's world, contemplation means emotional response to the harmony of qualities. It is possible to evaluate an aesthetic object without being moved by it, especially for someone who has many contacts with the works of art. But in this case, creation of an aesthetic object is a purely intellectual exercise, and the evaluation is based not on the proper constitution, but on the possibilities contained in the work of art. In this situation, we can rather think about the estimation of value. Real aesthetic experience is not purely intellectual. Ingarden finds the emotional component crucial. The qualities have to be seen, and only the experience makes the aesthetic judgment valid. The last and most important justification of value of the judgment is the accomplishment of the aesthetic experience. I quote, "The value of an aesthetic object is not the value of a means leading to an end. It is not something which may be ascribed to the object with regard to some objects or states of things existing outside it, but it is something contained in the object itself and based on the qualities and the harmony of qualities of the aesthetic object itself." End of quotation. According to Ingarden, the internalization, constitution and contemplation of an aesthetic object is absolutely necessary if we want to formulate any evaluation of a work of art. If the emotional response to the work of art is positive, the culmination of the process brings us the biggest possible satisfaction. The variety of actions, starting from the preliminary emotion, through the creative phase of constituting of an aesthetic object, leads us to the experience of the pure harmony of qualities and to the contemplation of the aesthetic value in itself. Ingarden writes, I quote, "Many times when we are placed in front of such a harmony, we are seized with a kind of astonishment. Namely, we are surprised to see that something of the kind, such a harmony, such a contrast, such a rhythm, such a melodic line, is possible. End of quotation. But not every aesthetic experience leads us to the culmination of positive emotional response. And what is important from my perspective, all the work of attention can bring us back to the old, well-known boredom. And all we can do in this situation is to get involved in another process of excitement, constitution, and contemplation. But why? Why do we need attention instead of boredom? And I'm going to the last part, and I hope I will try to answer this question, but I'm not entirely sure if my answer is right, because I would like to open this topic, and after these 3 days, as Graham promised, I hope that we will know much more about the attention. But my response for today will be like that. In conclusion, I want to say that there is one thing about boredom which I find particularly negative: the alienation. No matter if boredom is modern or postmodern, it does not matter if it is based on lack or on excess. It is always bringing some kind of alienating feeling of loneliness. It can come from the awareness of the temporal character of Dasein, of being confronted with the limitation of our existential project. And according to the Heidegger's Being and Time, this kind of awareness is something that can be confronted only individually. I cannot share with anyone my feeling of finitude in front of the abyss of being. There is nothing strange about trying to avoid such confrontation. Instead of avoiding it, one can, as I said before, surrender to the boredom of one's sofa and stop trying to search for an amusement, but get rid of all the stimuli, creating a space for attention and become ready for the change of attitude. In this case, boredom can be perceived as a preparatory phase for a preliminary emotion. Attention, in example in context of an aesthetic experience, leads the subject toward the aesthetic value. And as Ingarden says, everyone has to walk this path separately, on one's own, but all the ways lead more or less to the same place. Every successful experience of a given work of art brings the percipient to the aesthetic value, which is common and can be shared. According to Immanuel Kant, one of the most important characteristics of an aesthetic judgment is that it's based on pure subjectivity, but at the same time, it tends to objectivity. In example, if I find something aesthetically pleasing, I would like everybody to share that pleasure with me. I cannot force anyone to like something, but I can meet others who have walked freely into the sphere of the same aesthetic value as emancipated subjects. Emancipation, in this case, comes with the possibility of participation in the community where everyone comes with their own discovery of the aesthetic value that is shared and respected at the same time. And this is the point where aesthetics, as I think, become politically important. And my last remark, if we would like to use our attention in order to create some form of community, we have to do one thing. We have to practice. Thank you.